everyone, Kelly here, and today I want to share with you what I have read so far in February. I didn't want to wait till mid-month to put this out and do like a mid-month wrap-up because right now, like starting yesterday, I started reading new releases that are from like January and February, and I kind of want to do like a whole week of just reading new releases and then do that kind of wrap up of those and reviews of those next week. So I wanted to make sure that I kept this like into two different wrap-ups since some people are more interested in new releases than backlist books. And so these are all the things that I've read so far in February. Most of these had to do with either like a readathon or a challenge, so I'll make sure to mention those as I go. So the first book I want to talk about doesn't have to do with any of the readathons or anything, but I read A Million Junes by Emily Henry. And I picked this up because last year I read Beach Read, and it was one of my favorite books of 2020. I read it twice last year, and it was Emily Henry's newest book that was like her first adult romance. So I wanted to pick up one of Emily Henry's backlist books, one of her older books, and this one is a young adult book that kind of doesn't fit necessarily in a specific genre. There is romance, but it's definitely more like it's got a very magical feeling to it. There's ghosts, there's weird things occurring. Yeah, it gets a little weird throughout the book, but I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. So the plot of this is a little hard to describe, but we are following June, whose father died when she was younger. I think she was around 10 years old when her father died. They were really close. At the beginning of this book, she is 18 years old, and she has been told her whole life to stay away from members of the Angert family. She's an O'Donnell, and the O'Donnell and Angerts have had a family feud for generations. And at the beginning of this, a boy named Saul Angert, who she knew as a child and who she stayed away from as a kid because of her father telling her that the family don't mix. Saul comes back to town after being gone for 3 years. So Saul is 21 years old. He comes back to take care of his father in town. June hasn't seen him for several years, and she really wants to honor her father's memory by avoiding him, but they're put together in situations that just make it impossible for them to ignore each other. And so there's a lot of like that drama of like they're not meant to be friends or interact at all, but they're developing a friendship and more in this story. And then they're also connected by the fact that weird stuff starts happening that is telling them about what happened in their past and why maybe their families has started this feud in the first place. And so it's a lot about family history. There's a lot about grief in this. June lost her father. Saul also lost somebody important in his family. And even though both of those events, the death of their loved ones, happened years ago, they're both still dealing with that grief. And I think that this book, what it really does well is talk about grief and how the fact that it's not just something you get over immediately. Like, it's not like, oh, it's been a year, now everything's fine and I've gotten over the death of my loved one. That it's showing that grief is a constant process that you're going through potentially for your entire life, that grief of losing somebody that's close to you. I thought the romance was cute and all that stuff, but I wasn't necessarily fully invested in that part of the story. I really enjoyed, though, the family history and the topic and discussions over grief and family and honoring a loved one that's passed, but then still also honoring what's in your heart and what you feel in the current moment when you can't discuss it with this family member that is gone. So yeah, I would still recommend this, but it definitely has that young adult feel. And next I want to talk about America's First Daughter by Stephanie Dray and Laura Kamoie. And this one I kind of am including as part of Historathon. That's a readathon this month where you read historical fiction, hosted by Amanda from The Curly Reader and Angie from Science Mama. And I'll link their information about the readathon down below. But this one, I had started it last month, so I just finished it up this month, but it's a historical fiction. I'm including it for the readathon, and this one was for the prompt of a book in a place that you have visited. This book, it talks about Patsy Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson's daughter, so most of this takes place in Virginia, and I have been to Virginia. So like I said, this book is about Patsy Jefferson, and it follows her whole life from like childhood till she's older, and her father has passed away, so it's kind of like her whole time with Thomas Jefferson. And we're hearing about, Thomas Jefferson and things that he did, but we're really focusing on Patsy Jefferson and her life experiences. And just in terms of like historical accuracy, I don't know everything about what is historically accurate, but they did do an author's note at the end where they said that Jefferson wrote so many letters that a lot is known about Jefferson's life. And though there is less known about some of the details in Patsy's life, like about her marriage and relationship and all that stuff, there is quite a lot out there. So they kind of took the information they could from Jefferson's letters and then, fictionalized it and created more about her marriage and things like that. So some of it probably is speculative, but they did the best that they could in order to match it to real events that they know happened and real things that were included in letters from the family and stuff like that. And so this book is very well written, but this is bleak. This is a hard book to read. It took me a long time to finish this book. I mean, the audiobook is long. It's like 22 hours long, but even beyond the length, I had to keep putting it down. Like, there's just a lot happening in this book that is depressing and really tough to read. Like, Patsy's life itself was just hard. Like, the stuff that they talked about with her, like her marriage and with her children, a lot of that is just common to the time period, which was just hard for a lot of women. They didn't have choices in necessarily who they married or whether they had children or not, because birth control wasn't a thing back then. And so she had a lot of kids. Like in this book, I think she had 11 kids. And so there's just a lot of the struggles of being a mother of that many children when there's not a lot of money being had at the time, bad things happening in the family, but then there's also everything that's going on with Thomas Jefferson. And even before I read this book, I wasn't like the biggest fan of Jefferson. After some of the other things that I have read about, his hypocrisy, like saying that he wants to get rid of slavery and saying that he is against it and he wants equality and all that stuff, but then he's refusing to actually like free any of his slaves and stuff like that. It's hard. It is hard content to read. And yeah, it was just took me a long time to get through it, but I do think it's really well written. So I gave it 4 stars, but I wouldn't say like I loved this or that I like really enjoyed it. I think it was important to read. Like I said, it's fiction. So if you want to know like actual what exactly happened, like maybe read a biography, but like for me this was easier for me to read than a biography, and that's saying a lot because this is not easy to read. So, and then next I did want to read books by Black authors this month since it is Black History Month, and though I want to make sure I am reading books by Black authors all year round, there are a lot of readathons happening in February that I want to participate in. The one that I'm kind of like definitely trying to kind of fulfill is the Blacklit Challenge, which is hosted by Seiji from the Artisan Geek, and I'll link them down below. And basically that one, it's a very simple readathon, which is what I like, readathons that don't have a lot of like rules to them. And so this one is basically you're just supposed to like give yourself a point for every author that you read, like from a different country. So if they're American or British or Nigerian or whatever, you get a point from each place that the author's from. You get a point if it's like a different form of media other than just like a basic novel. So if it's poetry or nonfiction or a play, and you get points for like LGBT plus representation and disabled author, things like that. So it's just trying to get you to read a variety of Black authors. And I ended up reading 4 books, and I only got 2 points from these 4 books, which is fine. Like I wasn't like aiming these specific ones in order to get extra points, because all these authors are American, though when I talk about the talk, there's multiple authors in this, so I don't know if I should count that because I know some of them aren't necessarily American, but I'm not going to count it as a point because I do want to read some more books by other authors later in the month, and then I also get a point for reading nonfiction. So 2 points from those 4 books, but then also I just wanted to read more Black authors. It was just a way to also get, points for the challenge at the same time. And I hope to fulfill like 4 points total by the end of the month, which was kind of like the Seiji's goal was to get 4 points throughout the readathon. So I hope to be reading from an author from another country and a disabled author before the end of the month to fulfill my other 2 points. So let's talk about those books that I read, and I'm going to talk about them in the order I like them. And so the first one was A Princess in Theory by Alyssa Cole, and this is the first book in the Reluctant Royals series. And this one, I gave it a 3-star, but I want to make sure it's clear that that is solely based on my personal taste and not having to do with the quality of the book, but I do base part of my ratings off of my enjoyment, and I just didn't enjoy it more than a 3-star book. but I think that she is an excellent writer. I had read her thriller When No One Was Watching at the end of 2020 and really loved it, and I can recognize reading this that this was good writing, and I did enjoy the story. I just didn't love it. And I know I haven't actually talked about what this is about, so let me do that real quick so that'll help me talk about my particular taste. So this is about a man who is a prince in a made-up country in Africa. So Alyssa Cole made up this country, and he is the prince, and he is coming to America to try to find Nella, who is our main character. She's a grad student, and she was originally from this fictitious country, but her parents fled when she was really young, like 4 or something like that, and then her parents died, and so she never knew that she was from this country. She never knew the connection she had to this prince. She was supposed to be his betrothed, and so now that he's of the age where his parents want him to get married, he's going and looking for his betrothed and wants to find out why they fled the country. And he decides to pretend to be like a normal American named Jamal, and he pretends to be Jamal for a while to get to know Nella and see how he can convince her to come back to their country and get married. And so there's a little bit of that lying thing, which I just am not like a huge fan of, like people pretending to be somebody they're not, because I know that it happens a lot in royalty romances where the royal is like, I want to just be an average person, so I'm going to lie about the fact that I'm a prince and I'm just going to pretend to be an average Joe. And I'm not a huge fan of that. Like, it happens a lot in Hallmark movies, and those are not usually my favorites. They're not the ones I love very much, because it's just, you're lying to somebody for so long, and it takes a lot of time to build that trust back. And I did like how Alyssa Cole didn't make Nella like immediately like forgive him after he comes out with the truth. So there was like that rebuild of trust and all that stuff, but it just is not my personal preference. And I also just don't really like royals. So like in this book, you know, he's pretending to not be a royal for a long time, and then when he finally gets to be himself, I lost interest a lot in the story at that point, because I was like, well, I don't really care. It should be around like the king and the queen and the politics that are happening in your country and all this stuff as the prince and the problems you have as a prince. Like, I just wasn't that interested in that part. And so that has nothing to do with the writing. That's all just personal taste. And I didn't really realize I didn't like those in books, because I don't think I've ever read a book like that, or I've watched movies like that. But sometimes things that you don't like in movies, you might like in books, or vice versa. So even though I know I don't love royalty romance in movies, I now know I also don't like it in books. So ultimately, there was nothing wrong with this book, but it just wasn't my taste, royalty romance. I don't know whether I should continue the series, since they are probably all about royals, since it's called the Reluctant Royal series, but I don't know. I kind of need some advice. If you guys have read the next book in the series, let me know if it focuses a lot on the royalty part, or if I should give it another chance. I'll definitely try more Alyssa Cole books, like, because she has historical romances and other things other than this series, so maybe I'll try those. That the royal series just might not be for me, but I still think her writing is good, and ultimately it was an enjoyable book. It just was 3 stars for me because it wasn't my taste in romance. And then I read The Talk, Conversations About Race, Love, and Truth, and this is by several different authors, edited by Wade Hudson and Cheryl Willis Hudson, but like every single one of these, it's like short stories or essays or letters, and each one is written by a different author. So you'll see like there'll be an artist, so the artist is one person, and then usually the author is another person, and then it's like 3 to 5 pages of a short like essay or letter. And kind of the main point of this is a lot of them were like letters to children or conversations you would have with a child about race, basically. So there's Black authors, Asian authors, Indigenous authors, all that are in this. And so there's a lot of different styles of art, 'cause like I said, each one is a different artist and everything like that. So it definitely was a good book. I gave it 4 stars. The reason it didn't get 5 stars, even though I thought this was a really great book, is that I don't think that the cover and the like style of the book, like the actual physical book, did not work for me in what I think it was trying to do. And I think the point is that this is a children's book. Because as I'm reading it, I didn't know that going into it. I didn't know it was supposed to be for children. And then I'm reading it and I'm like, oh, this doesn't feel like an adult book. It's not like an adult series of essays. This is like talking to kids and how to talk to kids about race and about these harder conversations that people of color have to have with their children. And this would be something that would be really good to share with kids. But this doesn't look like a children's book when you look at it. Like, I think with all the amazing art that's inside this book, I would have preferred if this was looking like a regular children's book, like was a bigger size and had some of the artwork on the front. Because just looking at this, if this was sitting in the library in the children's section, I would not pick this up for my kids. The only reason I picked it up was because I had heard about it on like Instagram, and I thought it was a book for adults based on like what I had seen online and like it being recommended with other kind of like memoirs or essays about race. And then after I'm getting into reading it, I'm like, this is not what I expected. And I think it would do so much better. Like, I think parents would pick it up in a library or pick it up in a bookstore if it looked different, if it looked like what it actually was. So I feel bad giving it 4 stars because I think it's 5 stars worth of content. And all of the essays or all of the letters to kids and like conversations were good and everything. I just think that it should be reprinted as looking what it's supposed to be, like for kids, especially. I think this would definitely be for elementary or early middle school, and this does not look like a book for elementary and early middle school. So that's my main complaint. So 4 stars because of the branding. And then I picked up Passing by Nella Larsen, and this was written during like the Harlem Renaissance period. And I picked this up because I had read The Vanishing Half by Brett Bennett towards the end of 2020, and that was said to be inspired by this book because it is about a Black person passing as white. And like in this book, there are 2 women that grew up together and they meet later in life when they're, you know, adults and all that. And one of them is living life as a Black woman and the other one is living life passing as white, married to a white man that doesn't know that she is a Black woman and all that stuff. And so it is the same topic as the book The Vanishing Half. And so I wanted to kind of see what the source material was and how it was being written during the Harlem Renaissance. And I really enjoyed this one. This was 4 stars, and the only reason I got 4 stars is because I felt like it wrapped up a little too quickly for my taste. Like, this is a pretty short book. Like, this even has like, you know, since it's a classic, it has that whole area in the front where it's like the introduction. So the actual book itself is only like 115 pages. And if it had just been like even 20 pages longer and just kind of filled out the last section, this book is split into like 4 parts, I believe. If the last part had just had a little bit more, I would have just been like absolutely adoring this, 5 stars. But it just got to a point where it moved too fast at the end and I got a little confused and kind of had to reread the end. And I think it could have just had a little more. But overall, I would definitely recommend this. I liked this actually a lot better than I liked The Vanishing Half. I liked the conversations that were happening. And it was about like, you know, passing for white and all that. But then it was also about the relationships and marriage and like what you share with your husband or, you know, control in a marriage and things like that. There were so many other topics that were happening this, and I just think it was really interesting. I don't want to talk any more about it because it is so short, but I would definitely recommend picking this one up. And then I picked up I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness by Austin Channing Brown, and I would highly recommend this one. I gave this one 5 stars, really enjoyed this. This is a nonfiction sort of memoir book about Austin's experiences, and it, you know, talks about her experiences in childhood, but then also like into college and at the beginning of working and all that. And I just really connected to this book because I've been trying to read more and more, you know, anti-racism books or books about Black experience in America. And this one hit me like the closest to home because her life and my life very much mirror each other in the fact that she grew up in a town in Ohio 1 hour from where I grew up. Like, we grew up very close in proximity. She's the same age as me. She went to a college that was a Christian college. She then started her career in nonprofit Christian organizations, which is what I did. And she did it in Chicago, where I lived for 11 years. And so our life trajectory really like matched up a lot, so it just felt like I could really connect to her. But then obviously her experience is much different than mine, because she was doing all of that in the Midwest, you know, being a Black Christian woman. And so even though if you were just to look at the like facts of our lives, they would be very close, obviously she dealt with a lot of different things than I did. And so this connection to like working for these organizations that really say one thing, they say that they want to be progressive, they say they want to be diverse, but then the action isn't actually there. Like I could really like see that. And I think it even says that like in the cover, you know, that these institutions, they claim to value diversity in their mission statements, but I'm still here as a powerful account of how and why our actions so often fall short of our words. And so this just really hit me. I thought this was so well written and short and to the point. So if you feel like you really aren't into reading nonfiction, this is a short book. I think you could easily read it. I listened to the audiobook, which is narrated by Austin. So good, and I would highly recommend picking this one up. And then last, I wanted to talk about a book that I read from my 21 books to read in 2021. I just posted that video like a week or two ago. These were books that you all voted for me to read from my shelves so that I could read more of my physical TBR. And I read my first book from that list, and it was Audrey Hepburn, An Elegant Spirit. And this is written by her son, Sean Hepburn Ferrer. And this book was so good. I cannot believe I owned this book for so long and hadn't read it. This was 5 stars. I loved the experience of reading this. I probably will be keeping this and looking through it and reading parts of it again. I just really adored this. This isn't like a full-on biography, so if you're looking for an actual biography, there are people that have written like thick biographies. This is more just a son telling us what his mother was really like. And Audrey Hepburn is one of my absolute favorite actors of all time. I've loved her for years. I've owned this book for a long time. Probably like got it pretty soon after it was written. Like I think it was written in the early 2000s. Yeah, 2003. So I've probably owned it since probably around that time. And I can't believe I haven't picked it up. I'm just not great at picking up these kind of like big coffee table books. But now I wish I picked it up earlier, because the photography in this is stunning. There's like professional photography and stuff like that, but then there's also like family photos. Like this is a family photo that's in here, but then there's also ones like still shots from her movies and things like that. But like so many pictures. Like a lot of these chapters would only have maybe like 3 pages of text, and then the next 5 page would just be these full page spread of pictures. So it's just gorgeous. If you like Audrey Hepburn, I would definitely say pick this up. But like I said, if you're looking to know everything about her life, this is not a full biography. But it's just so touching to see her son talk about her. And I always thought that she was as genuine a person in real life as she seemed to be on the screen. And I did know that she had, you know, volunteered with UNICEF towards the end of her life. So I knew she was a humanitarian and all that stuff, but I didn't really know much about her. I hadn't read an actual biography. But this, you know, it really, her son like just really talks about how she really just was that beautiful, kind, generous person that everybody kind of sees on the screen, that she really was that person in real life. She was always kind to everybody that she worked with. She gave up acting when the kids were going to school because they couldn't go on location with her, because family was really important to her. How much she was just invested in UNICEF and kids around the world towards the end of her life. And if she hadn't died, she definitely would have continued to do that. And yeah, this is touching and beautiful, and I just would highly recommend it if you love Audrey Hepburn. And that's it. That's everything that I have read so far in February. Like I said earlier, I am going to be reading this coming week a bunch of newer books from January and February. And so if you are interested in some new releases, make sure to check out for that video that'll probably be coming up next week once I've finished. I have about 5 or 6 I want to read, and so I don't know if I'm going to wait until I've read all of them to film that video, or if I'm just going to say, hey, by next Tuesday, as many of them as I have read, that's what I'm going to talk about. But look for that next week, and if you want to talk about any of these books, I'd love to hear from you down below. Thanks, bye.